read it, and together with that, the more famous ones are his novels, 9 of them. And it's more exciting for us to realize that he is soon to publish a sequel to Rites of Passage. There's another one coming after that, and he has promised me that he's going to write yet another, on women, wholesome women. So we have a lot more to look forward to beyond this afternoon. This occasion has been organized by the Forum of College English Teachers and the ELT community of Bangalore. We are a community of teachers who meet to learn to teach better. I think the greater excitement is just coming together at all as a family and sharing our insights with each other. And the next thing there's only one other thing, and that is to welcome every one of you here, especially this.
I believe a number of you were present yesterday when I did what I have come to call my sword-swallowing act in public. And I don't want to inflict the same things on you twice. Moreover, well, in your music, if I'm not mistaken, you have modes, ragas, which are suitable for different times of the day. You heard yesterday, those of you who were here, my evening raga, which, contrary to your own, is not somnolent, but rather lively. This afternoon, I'm afraid I can only sing to you with my afternoon raga, which is extremely somnolent, and I shall not expect more than the occasional titter. I shall be grateful for it, I may say, if I get it, but I don't expect anything more than that. Now, what I'm going to do is to read to you from the piece of work which was more difficult to write than anything else I've ever had to write in my life. When you win, or are awarded rather, the Nobel Prize, one of the penalties among all the other benefits is that you have to give a public speech in Stockholm, and this is supposed to be worthy of the Nobel Prize, even if it may not be worthy of you. It is extremely difficult when you are approaching the end of a considerably long life. After all, I'm 75. It is extremely difficult to find anything new to say. And so I struggled vainly and at last almost had to give up. But I finally did come through to considering what I was entitled to speak about was the English language itself, the place, the value even, of the novel in it, and then consider whether language itself may not, in some way, be our salvation. My own language, English, I believe to have a store of poets, of writers that need not fear comparison with those of any other language, ancient or modern. But today, that language may suffer from too wide a use rather than too narrow a one, maybe an oak rather than a lily. It spreads right round the world as the medium of advertisement, navigation, science, negotiation, conference. 100 political parties have it daily in their mouths. Perhaps a language subjected to such strains as that may become here and there just a little thin. In English, too, a man may think he is addressing a small, distinguished audience, or his family, or his friends. Perhaps he is brooding aloud, it may be, or even talking in his sleep. And later he finds that without meaning to, he has been addressing a large segment of the world, and that is a daunting thought. But I take quiet pleasure in the consideration that though variants of my mother tongue may be spoken by a greater number of people than are to be found in our island off the west coast of Europe, nevertheless they are speaking dialects, variants of what is still centrally English. Personally, I cannot tell whether these many dialects are being rendered mutually incomprehensible by distance faster than they are being unified by television and satellites. But at the moment, the English writer faces immediate comprehension or partial comprehension by a good part of 1 billion people. His critics are limited in number only by the number of the people who can read his work. I think apprehensively of the mark I present before the serried ranks of those who can shoot at me if they choose. Even my most famous fellow laureate and fellow countryman in the English language, Winston Churchill, did not escape from criticism when he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. A critic remarked with acid wit of his getting the award, was it for his poetry or his prose? But of course, both poetry and prose are crossed. I think it is almost an academic disease that has led to the too rigid separation of these modes of communication. Narration, obviously we have it in novels, but we also have it in poetry. I suppose the Rime of the Ancient Mariner must be one of the most wonderful poems written certainly in our language, my language, English, and yet it is a story of adventure and fantasy, a true narration. Well, now then, that being so, what is the contribution of narration, and particularly narration as it occurs in the novel? What is this to contribute to mankind? Put simply, it's my belief that the novel, the story, stands between us and the hardening concept of statistical man. Statistical man, that non-existent creature, like economic man, that other non-existent creature, this average creature, this number, this cipher on a page. A novel stands between us and becoming that. There is no other medium in which we can live for so long and so intimately with a character. Think for a moment of one of the most celebrated novels ever written, War and Peace. Now, Tolstoy's basic idea was to reduce humanity to great tides of movement. The tide of movement of Napoleon sweeping across Europe and into Russia with his army, the equal tide that welled up round that army, led by General Winter, and which drove that army back and then followed it and gradually swallowed it up and ruined it. He set out to do that in noble terms, in novel terms. But what do we find? I will read to you now something that I wrote about this book many years ago, about War and Peace. Instrument and victims of the uncontrolled Napoleonic War are those 100 or so characters who inhabit the fringe of Tolstoy's book. Any half-dozen of them would make a Jane Austen novel. They are drawn with just such an exquisite and ironic pen. Old Count Rostov, incapable of doing anything but give parties, as a queen bee is incapable of doing anything but laying eggs. Prince Vasily, lazy, selfish, and methodical. Ellen, his cold, sensual daughter. Anna Pavlovna, Alpatich. They come storming into the mind with armies of bedraggled soldiers and peasants once attention is directed away from the center of the book, and over them all loom the figures of Napoleon and Kutuzov, flamelit and massive as the figures of Gog and Magog. But at the center are those characters whom we know as we know life itself. We can argue about Natasha as we can argue about Mary, Queen of Scots. That sketched relationship between Prince Bolkonsky and his wife has the awful validity of the people just up the road. At the center of the center is bumbling Pierre, ego, homo praesens, I, home, this creature, knowledgeable and ignorant, incompetent at bed and duel, tremulous, wealthy, astonished, slave of 5 appetites, slothful and vigorous, selfish and generous, educated and undedicated, an awareness of living with nothing to lose but his brains. We know them all, and we do not understand them, nor did Tolstoy. Men felt exhilaration in battle. They died willingly for a man they did not know. Natasha was unfaithful, and the objective description comes across great gaps in causality. At every turn, in every page, life itself faces us, and the face is always an individual human face. That is the service a novel renders. It performs no less an act than the rescue and the preservation of the individuality and dignity of the single being, be he man, woman, or child. No other art, I claim, can so thread in and out of a single mind and body, so live another life. It does ensure that at the very least, a human being shall be seen to be more than just 1/billionth of 1 billion. Well, so much for the use of the novel. Now, language in general and ourselves in the future. We do face 2 overwhelming dangers as a species, do we not? The one is the ultimate catastrophe of a world destroyed by nuclear war. Now, I'm going to stick my neck out here and say frankly that I do not believe that will ever happen. I have a simple faith that it will never happen, and I think the greatest reason for believing that is that man, as a human being, is too scared to do it. And I could only wish that we would save ourselves by a nobler quality of the human being than his capacity for being frightened out of his wits. But nevertheless, I do think that is a particular danger of which we must always be aware, never forget, and yet which I don't think will ever come to pass. Now we face a second danger. For this the future is not so clear. The other danger is the more difficult to combat. To quote another laureate, our race may end not with a bang, but with a whimper. It must be nearer 70 years ago than 60 that I first discovered and engaged myself to a magic place. This was on the west coast of our country. It was on the seashore among rocks. I early became acquainted with the wonderful interplay of earth and moon and sun, enjoying them at the same time as I was assured that scientifically you could not have action influence at a distance. There was a particular phase of the moon at which the tide sank more than usually far down and revealed to me a small recess, which I remember as a cavern. There was plenty of life of one sort or another round all the rocks and in the pools among them. But this pool, farthest down, and revealed, it seemed, by an influence from the sky only once or twice during the times when I had the holiday privilege of living near it, this last recess, before the even more mysterious deep sea, had strange inhabitants which I had found nowhere else. I can now remember and even feel, but alas, not describe, the peculiar engagement, excitement, and no, not sympathy or empathy, but passionate recognition of a living thing in all its secrecy and strangeness. It was, or rather they were, real as I was. It was as if the center of our universe was there for my eyes to reach at like hands to seize on by sight. Only a hand's breadth away, in the last few inches of still water, they flowered, grey, green, and purple, palpably alive, a discovery, a meeting, more than an interest or a pleasure. They were life. We together were delight itself, until the first ripples of returning water blurred and hid them. When the summer holidays were over, and I went back again about as far from the sea as you can get in England, I carried with me like a private treasure the memory of that cave. Now, in some strange way, I took the cave with me, and its creatures that flowered so strangely. In nights of sleeplessness and fear of the supernatural, I would work out the phases of the moon, returning in thought to the slither and clamber among the weeds of the rocks. There were times when, though I was far away, I found myself before the cavern, watching the moon dazzle as the water sank, and was comforted somehow by the magical beauty of a common world. I have been back since. The recess, for now it seems no more than that, is still there, and at low water springs, if you can bend down far enough, you can still look inside. Nothing lives there any more. It is all very clean now, ironically so. Clean sand, clean water, clean rock. Where the living creatures once clung, they have worn two holes like the orbits of eyes, so that you might well sentimentalize yourself into the fancy that you are looking at a skull. No life. Was it a natural process? Was it fuel oil? Was it sewage or chemicals more deadly that killed my childhood's bit of magic and mystery? I cannot tell, and it does not matter. What matters is that this is only one tiny example among millions of how we are impoverishing the only planet we have to live on. Well now, what has literature to say to that? We have computers and satellites. We have ingenuities of craft that can land a complex machine on a distant planet and get reports back, and so on. You know it all as well. Well, you know it better than I. Literature has words only. But think of the first flint axe. Think of the soft copper chisel with which man first carved his own likeness in stone. That tool makes a poor showing, one would think, among the products of the silicon chip. But now let us go back for a moment and remember Winston Churchill. For despite the cynical critic, whatever you think of Winston Churchill, he got the Nobel Prize neither for poetry nor for prose. He got it for about a single page of simple sentences which are neither poetry nor prose, but are, I repeat what has been called finally, the poetry of the fact. He got it for those passionate utterances which were the very stuff of human courage and defiance. Those of us who lived in England through those times know that Churchill's poetry of the fact changed the face of history. Perhaps then, the flint axe, the soft copper chisel, the word is not so poor a tool after all. Words may, through the devotion, the skill, the passion, and the luck of writers, prove to be the most powerful tool in the world. They may move men to speak to each other because some of those words somewhere express not just what the writer is thinking, but what a huge segment of the world is thinking. They may allow a man to speak to man, the man in the street to speak to his fellow, and a ripple become a tide running through every nation of common sense, of simple, healthy caution, a tide that rulers and negotiators cannot ignore, so that at last nation does truly speak unto nation. And then there is hope that we may learn to be temperate, provident, taking no more from nature's treasury than is our due. It may be by books, stories, poetries, lectures, that we who have the ear of mankind can move man a little nearer the perilous safety of a warless and provident world. It cannot be done by the mechanical constructs of overt propaganda. I cannot do it myself, cannot now create stories which would help to make man aware of what he is doing, but there are others who can, many others. There always have been. We must have more humanity, more care, more love. There are those who expect a political system to produce that, and others who expect the love to produce the system. My own faith is that the truth of the future lies between the two, and we shall behave humanely and a bit humanly, stumbling along, haphazardly generous and gallant, foolish, meanly wise, until the rape of our planet is seen to be the preposterous folly that it is.
Mr. Golding, my question is about the inheritors, more by way of seeking some kind of clarification. In the inheritors, we see two kinds of communication, mainly. Locke and Farr are able to share pictures with each other. And even when verbal language is used, the utterance has the ring of finality. On the other hand, the new people's language is a kind of bird speech, extremely rapid and without any grace. What are your views on the nature of language? We notice that Locke breaks into a stream of verbal speech after he discovers like, analogy, and reason. So are language and reason a product of the fall, or are they just corrupted by it?
Oh dear. I will lay one card on the table and say that The Inheritors is the favorite among my own favorite among my own books, and which is one of the reasons why I dedicated it to my wife. The other thing is that as I have not reread it for more than 20 years, I think that possibly if I reread it, I might not find it was my favorite book now, which is a great difficulty. The other thing is that although I know the story, I'm still aware of the story in outline, I cannot remember it in absolute detail. Nevertheless, I will try and answer this question. I don't know how far language is a function of reason. I think probably it is not, or perhaps I'll give a more general term to reason and call it thought, the power of thinking. You see, it seems to me that the fall is not language, the fall is thought, the fall is self-awareness. if one takes the animal kingdom and accepts the general view of the descent of man, I, in my amateur way, question this very much, but never mind that. We'll suppose for the moment that man has emerged from other kinds of creatures who were less than man. Homo habilis may be a man like us or may not have been, but he was preceded by someone who quite likely, apparently according to what skull there is left, couldn't really talk in the way that we can talk. If you can't talk and if you can't think, and you only have a kind of dream awareness of selfhood, then it is very difficult for the fall to take place, because it is extremely difficult for you to do anything but what is absolutely natural to you. A tiger does what is natural to it, and a tiger cannot fall because it cannot do anything but what is natural to it. You can train it to do things, but that's only by making it afraid to do other things. So that is not any question of thought. So I equate the thought with man's self-awareness, the emergence of self-awareness, the emergence of thought which will enable him to say, not only do I want more of my share of that fruit than that other person, I know how to get it because I can do that, you see, with a stick and pull it near me. So it seems to me that the mythological pictures of man's fall remain pictures, but there is a truth hidden in them, pictorially as it were, hidden in them, that man's fall is really man's emergence. You can, if you like, say that man climbed and fell at the same moment. So in that sense, I believe in original sin, that to be a man is to have this difficulty, this capacity, this incapacity in a sense, to be wholeheartedly natural. I believe that is inherent in him. So to that extent, I believe in original sin, which is only a shorthand for what I've been talking about. I also believe in original virtue, because I believe that man is not a tiger meeting to breed once and then parting. I believe there's not only a nuclear family, an extended family, a tribe, perhaps even a nation, among which altruism may be spread. And altruism, of course, is the result of original virtue. So, but on the other hand, I've said this, and I think it's so good an analogy that I present it here to the few people who may not have heard it before. You consider the colors red and blue. Red comes out at you and attacks you. Blue fades into the background, so that if you have a pattern made just of red and blue lines, the red lines will seem to be standing out in front of a blue background. The blue will never seem to be standing out in front of the red background. Now, original sin, violence, wickedness, is colored red and stands out. Original virtue, altruism, is colored blue and sinks back. And that is why it is far easier to find original sin in novels than original virtue.
Would you say the emergence of this? That is Sir, would you say this emergence of self-awareness, as you have just called it, was it responsible for Pincher's inability to accept death, as contrasted to Mal's subtle or calm blending into it?
Say that this, now we're talking about Pincher Martin, which is one book, and The Inheritors, which is another. Mal, the old man who dies, accepts his death as natural and wants to go to sleep, and his family put him to sleep with love and bury him with love. May I add No, I'll go on and then come back. Yes, it's quite true. Pincher is unable to accept death. He fights against it. He would sacrifice anything not to die. Because the great thing about Pincher is that he lives on after his death because of his monstrous self-awareness, his monstrous egotism, which we can find in the world about us. We do know people like that. And yes, I think you're quite right. The distinction to be made between those two deaths is between the natural man and the sport, the variant, the too self-aware man, the man who values himself beyond everything else.
On others, is it necessary for him to impose his selfhood before he becomes aware?
He intensifies his self-awareness by imposing himself on other people, because by conquering other people, you increase your own self-awareness of your own virtues of strength and mercilessness and all the rest of it. You see, you build up the strength of your own selfhood. I was only going back to comment on the Neanderthal people in The Inheritors. It was very interesting because I wrote it as a reaction against H.G. Wells's simplistic view of evolution and the descent of man, in which he made Neanderthal men into ogres, and we are the jolly good, clean-living chaps that came afterwards. Well, I just couldn't believe that, because although Wells